Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about writing the research essay. This PowerPoint presentation is part one of a two-part set. The first important steps in writing a research essay are to start with an original thesis statement, to lay out your supporting points first before you do any of your research. Use the research then to develop your supporting points. Be ready to adjust your focus or change your supporting points depending upon your research. Let's start with a basic outline using one of the ideas we developed in a previous PowerPoint. The thesis that we came up with was, the most important consideration in healthcare reform should be access to services. The subtopic areas we came up with were access to doctors, access to wellness care, access to testing and diagnostics, and access to vaccines. Now let's look at one of those subtopic areas. Within the thesis, the most important consideration in healthcare reform should be access to services is the subtopic area, access to doctors. The subtopic area is that primary care doctors should be available in all geographic areas. How do we do this? Government should incentivize doctors to practice in geographic areas of need, including urban and rural areas. Government should incentivize doctors to practice primary care instead of specialization. And finally, there should be cooperation with local and state governments to make it advantageous for doctors to practice in underserved areas. Now note, these are all of your ideas that you developed through brainstorming and planning. You have developed all this prior to doing any of your research. Now, let's look at one of these particular areas closely. Primary care doctors should be available in all geographic areas. That is your subtopic. So here you're going to put in some initial research. Look up studies on the need for available healthcare service in very rural and urban areas. Next, we're going to look at a more minor topic area within that subtopic area, and that is the area of, in order to provide such access to doctors, government should incentivize doctors to practice in geographic areas of need, including urban and rural areas. Again, you're going to add research here. You're going to look up existing programs like this, or whether there are proposals for such programs as examples. So you have built your outline based upon your own ideas and the areas you would like to develop, and then see what kind of support you can find for your own ideas next. Now, a second subtopic area is that government should incentivize doctors to practice primary care instead of specialization. Again, we'll add research there as well. We'll look up any existing programs that there are out there, or if there are proposals for such programs as examples. So this is the very methodical way you begin to find research to support your points. Okay, now, step one, finding the research. What I did was I searched studies on healthcare access, and I got a whole bunch of scholarly articles for studies on healthcare access. Those would be good resources to find appropriate information. One thing that I found was from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And it was a study that showed how there are ways that rural communities lack healthcare access. This fits exactly within my area of development. It fits under Section 1, Part 1, Doctors Available in All Geographic Areas. I found a quote within that article that reads, "Two new studies funded by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality show how challenging it can be for residents of the nation's rural areas to access mental health and hospital services. The research, published today in Journal of Health Affairs, looks at services provided in areas where about 60 million people, or 1 in 5 Americans, live. That would be an appropriate bit of information to put into a paper." A second quote, "Our small towns and farm communities are part of the essential fabric of the country, but healthcare in rural America is stretched too thin." And then it goes on. But you see how that is an excellent quote to support your point. Healthcare in rural America is stretched too thin. Now, we realize that we're going to have a lot of information available that's going to support the point that we need more healthcare in rural and underserved areas. So now, this notion that there should be cooperation with local and state governments to make it advantageous for doctors to practice in underserved areas is going to be already covered in the other two areas. So this is now repetitive and not necessary as a subtopic area. Government should incentivize doctors to practice primary care instead of specialization in an effort to encourage wellness and convenient one-stop shopping. This is another area that we are going to develop, and it will work with the research we are finding. We're going to develop this a little differently. We're going to explore available primary care that includes wellness care, primary care that includes vaccines, and diagnostic testing. So now we've changed the format for the paper just slightly. Access to mental health care should also be a priority in all geographic areas. So now, this is what our revised basic outline looks like. There is our thesis. Doctors should be available in all geographic areas where needed. They should be incentivized to practice where needed. Doctors should be encouraged to practice primary care, including wellness care, vaccines, and diagnostic testing, and mental health should be readily available in all areas. So based on the exploration that I did in just beginning to read through some articles, I realized that our subtopic areas should change. You should always be prepared to do that as you begin to explore your research. Now, next up, putting it all together. How do we incorporate the quotes? Using direct quotation versus paraphrase, and citations and works cited bibliography. All of that will be covered in our next presentation.